Hold your breath. Make a wish. Now count to 3.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Atlanta Jazz Notes podcast, where we profile the many amazing people who make up the Atlanta jazz scene. I'm your host, Matt Miller. This week I had the chance to interview the great trumpeter, singer, and bandleader Joe Gransden. The legendary singer Smokey Robinson said of Joe that he, quote, has an innate ability to connect with his audience. His singing and trumpet playing are world class. Throw in his 16-piece big band, you have something very special. I couldn't agree more.
What we'll see will defy explanation.
In this episode, Joe talks about trumpet technique, learning to play jazz, life during the pandemic, the jazz scene in New York and Atlanta, developing his career, and much more.
Anything you want to do it. Want to change the world. There's nothing to
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy.
So,
I'm doing these interviews with people who I think are really important on the Atlanta jazz scene. But if you don't mind, I'll ask you just about your life and music, starting at the beginning, I guess. So you grew up in a family of musicians.
I did, man. My father's a great jazz piano player and singer. My uncle was on Broadway his whole life. His brother, my uncle Eddie, great singer and bass player in New York City, and later in life turned contractor and contracted like the Rainbow Room and different shows, the Algonquin Bar on, I think that's on 59th Street, but was very heavy in the music scene in New York City. So on both sides of the family, my grandfather, my father's father, was a great trumpet player and played in bands like Benny Goodman and Glenn Miller. You know, sat in with those bands when they would come through New York. But
Yeah,
whole career. It was certainly in the family, and I knew early on what I was going to do.
that's so cool. And were you guys grow up in the city, or were you in Westchester, or were you a little north of the city? Where did you grow up?
I have a lot of family in Westchester, but I was born in basically Yonkers, just north of Manhattan.
Okay.
And then spent a bunch of years in Hopewell Junction, which is I don't know, it's probably an hour north of New York City. Beautiful, beautiful little town. But most of my childhood was Buffalo, New York.
Oh, gotcha. And what was the music scene like there? Was it pretty happy? I know there are some famous people from that area.
Yeah, it was killing. The Buffalo jazz scene was very hip. All kinds of great players, from Dave Chavone, Jeff Jarvis, Sam Noto, Don Menza was there for a long time, Bobby Mello. I mean, I was a kid, but my father was on that scene, you know, and played gigs all over Buffalo and was constantly bringing me out to these jam sessions and letting me sit in. So it was a really, really great experience. There was a big band there, Phil Simms and the Buffalo Brass.
Mm-hmm.
Been with them and play a little bit, but it was made up of all the top musicians in Buffalo at the time. So I had a great childhood, and as far as being exposed to this music.
Yeah, and that's Chuck Mangione is from Buffalo. Is that right?
I don't know if he's from Buffalo or Rochester. I think he's from Rochester.
Oh, Rochester. Yeah, of course.
It's literally 45 minutes away. I mean, it's right down.
Gotcha. So kind of similar scene.
Yeah.
So like aside from family members, who were the first people you listened to that you were really blown away by, like musically? What was an album or a live show?
Well, I mean, there was always the greats were always being played in the house, from Sinatra to Nat King Cole, Miles Davis. My folks always had that type of music on. So, and I would listen to it and I would enjoy it, but it wasn't something that really, I was 8, I was 7, I was 6 years old. But when I was probably closer to 13 or 14, my father came home with a Chet Baker record, a new Chet Baker record called Diane, which was a duo record with Paul Bly.
Yeah.
Or is it Paul Bley? Paul Bly.
Yeah, I think it's Paul Bley, but yeah, that's a great album. I love that album.
Man, I heard that, and it was on vinyl. Of course, this is 1985, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It was on my bed, my pillow, when I came home from school. My father said, "Listen to this." He had heard it on the jazz radio station that day. He had heard a cut, and he said, "My son would love this." So I put it on, and I was transformed instantly to wanting to become a jazz musician. I probably listened to that record 500 times, and I immediately sat down with my horn, knowing nothing about keys, knowing nothing about key signatures, chord changes, or anything, and tried to pick out the pretty notes that Chet was playing.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly, very slowly developed a little bit of an ear And so that was kind of the record that did it for me. That one, and there was another one that my grandfather had left me when he passed away called, it's a Bobby Hackett record called The Most Beautiful Horn in the World. And Bobby's playing the cornet and just playing these gorgeous American songbook standards. Not a whole lot of improvisation, but just the melody with some embellishments. And I couldn't believe how it struck me. It was like a drug, really.
Yeah. No, that's. I'm always interested in people's initial experiences with music and how they kind of figured out how they figured out a process to approach jazz. Were you just listening to these albums and figuring stuff out? Did you have a really great teacher there, or were you kind of self-taught?
Well, at that point, I was self-taught. I mean, I was in the band at school, and you know, I always had good teachers, but I was so in love with the trumpet at this point that I took it upon myself to try to become good. In other words, I practiced all day long, and I practiced what I was told to practice, but I practiced incorrectly. Or maybe a better way to put it is I never let the muscle relax and rest. I just kept practicing, and I developed all these bad habits where my mouthpiece would slide down and dig into the red part of my lip. And that's how I played trumpet mostly all the way through college. And I was putting so many hours in that I was good enough to play first trumpet in the band and you know, win some awards here or there, or be known as a young guy with a little bit of jazz knowledge. But I was really damaging my lip. You know, it was about 21 or 22, maybe later, 23. I had to stop for almost a year and relearn to play. So I did have good teachers, but nobody ever seemed to catch the fact that I was playing like what they would call way too low, you know, playing on the bed. And it was just from I don't know, if you put it on your face the right way at the beginning, you might be in good shape. But I was just trying everything to play those high notes like Maynard Ferguson and those pretty notes like Chet Baker and wanted to sound like Miles. I loved it all, Rafael Mendez, and I kind of did a little damage, you know. But
interesting. Yeah, I have a lot of friends. I've talked to a lot of other trumpet playing friends who had the same issue. Had to take a whole rebuild period, which I can only imagine how frustrating that is when you feel like you're making progress and having to sound bad again, you know. To relearn, you have to sound bad for a while.
It was career ending. I mean, it was
really.
I had come back. I was on the road for a year with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra, and I was playing fourth trumpet, and there wasn't a lot of demand on that book for anything in the upper register or any kind of ridiculous endurance like you might have to do if you're playing a classical trumpet concerto. It was just playing the fourth book. So I got away with it, and I sounded okay on it. But when I came back, I was sick of it. I was tired of. Now I was in my 20s, and I wasn't really progressing. My jazz chops were getting better. I was learning more about chords and harmony, but I couldn't get through a characteristic study in the Arvin book, for instance. I went to see me and Mike Berry. I don't know if you know Mike Berry.
I don't.
To Atlanta after he left, but he played lead in my big band for a while. He's just a monster trumpet player, whether it's legit music or big band music or jazz or pop. You know, he plays lead trumpet. Him and I went to see Vinnie DiMartino in Kentucky, and Vince DiMartino's, you know, arguably one of the greatest trumpet players on the planet, and certainly one of the greatest teachers. And Mike knew him. I had met him before, but Mike knew him and said, "Let's go take a lesson with Vinnie." And Mike went in and spent an hour and a half with Vinnie, and I kind of stood outside the door and listened. And then I went in and had an hour with Vinnie, and Vinnie looked at my chops right away and he said, "Dude, you're in trouble." Really? And he could recognize that I had put time in. He could recognize I had technique and I had some sort of feel for the music. But he said, you're never gonna really get there on this instrument if you don't move that mouthpiece up off the red. And I said, good, yeah, I'll start tomorrow. He said, yeah, but it's going to take. It's a memory. It's like changing your golf swing. And I was dedicated. I went home. I was living with my parents. I'd moved from New York City to Atlanta. My mom and dad had transferred here. And I sat in that basement for hours every day. And this time took rests in between practicing. I cried a lot. And I was horrible. And even after 6 months, I finally had an embouchure that was above the red and I could play. But, 3, 4, 5 minutes into playing, it would want to slide right back down to where that comfortable spot was. And the dedication it took to, this is like, see, I'm almost 50, I'm 49. So we're talking years and years ago. And to this day, if I get really worn out, I can feel it wanting to go back.
Start to slip.
That's how dangerous that muscle memory is.
That's crazy. Yeah. And it's on trumpet. On saxophone, there's a lot more you can be a little more idiosyncratic in your embouchure. There's all different styles. I mean, essentially people have the same, the great players have a similar look, but it is crazy. It's the trumpet is so much, it's unforgiving, I find. Yeah.
A lot of French horn, same way.
Mm-hmm.
Trombone, the mouthpiece is bigger. So you're basically going to cover, you're going to cover your, because the fleshy part has to vibrate.
Mm-hmm.
The upper lip. I've seen some trumpet players like Woody Shaw. He would anchor the mouthpiece on the bottom lip, and that's kind of okay because you can still get this top part to buzz. But I was pushing into the red and forcing that red part to vibrate, so I could screech out these high notes for like a minute, and then I'd have to wait until all the blood flowed back in. And I could trick people. I could get away with it, especially in high school and college. You lay out for 8 bars in a big band shout course, and then you come in on some stupid high note. It was great, but it was, and I knew it back then too. By the way, I knew that something was wrong. I knew that to put in this much time and not be progressing it'd be like running 6 miles a day. You don't lose a pound. Something's
up. Yeah.
But eventually I got it together, and during this time we've had quarantined at home basically. I've put a lot of time back into the fundamentals that I haven't done in 25 years.
That's cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because it's such a drastic change. Yeah. And for someone like you, who's, probably the busiest person in Atlanta playing this music, it's like, how do you transition from being every night playing to being not booked? Was it a difficult transition?
Yeah, it was difficult. I didn't think it would be, but I played 350 gigs last year. And happy to do it. I was very tired and working every single night, but most of my work is in the Southeast in Atlanta, drivable, so I really wanted to, I made a conscious effort years ago when I started my big band that I wanted to work a lot, but I wanted to stay close to home. I wanted to be with my wife and son as much as possible. I didn't really want to go to, see the world. I kind of had done that with the Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. So I put a lot of time in locally. And it kind of paid off. But now I had trouble saying no, and I did everything, and I would try to save money, but I was always home every night, so I might have traveled about a month per year, which is not that bad for gigs, right?
Oh, sure.
But when we got, I guess it was early March. When did we finally get?
It was probably like March 14th, around then, when it started to really shut down. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, it's hard to talk about this because so many people were, ill and people were dying. It was so there's no happy side to it. But for me, there was this ability to rest finally.
Sure.
And stay home and not get home at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. from some late night gigs. So for the first month, it was almost like vacation. Once again, not excusing the fact that there was so much tragedy out there in the world. My family and I, we were praying every day for everybody, including ourselves. But I was able to sleep. We would have a little cocktail hour every day, my wife and I got a big green egg, man. I started cooking on that. And
that's cool.
And I had a routine every morning. I'd play long tones for an hour, and then I'd do my scales. I happen to be friends with Kenny G, the great saxophone player. And Kenny would send me little clips of him playing a lick or two that he's been working on. And my job was to learn that lick and then send him one. So we were kind of going back and forth.
That's cool.
It was kind of fun. It was kind of a nice little challenge. And he's so incredible. He would, whatever lick I would play, like something I stole from Freddie or something I stole from Clifford, he'd have it the next day. And then he'd send me something. And his are usually ones that he came up with, he wrote.
Yeah.
And it would take me 2 weeks.
Really? That's cool. I mean, I think something about doing things on different instruments is really helpful too. Him playing something on trumpet and then you playing something from sax. I mean, I find that very valuable.
It just didn't lay under my fingers the way I wanted it to. But then eventually I would get it, and then he'd send me a harder one. So, but that was kind of the routine for a long time. I mean, Kenny and I didn't do that every day, but we did that quite a bit. And then I would play some jazz. I'd play a little piano. I'd go to the gym. And after 2 or 3 weeks, my body finally went, I finally was back to normal. And now it's like, now I'm all screwed up again. Enough's enough, man. I want to get to work.
Yeah, but things are starting to pick up a little bit for you. I've seen you out there playing. I'm sure it's not to the same extent as before, but
Yeah, there's little things popping up here and there that are kind of getting me out, getting me going. I think that the one danger with this whole stay-at-home thing is becoming lazy. You know, I mean, it was a break probably for everybody for a while. It was a break, except for the folks that were struggling, you know, with this disease, with this virus. I mean, but getting lazy is there. It's in my head. You know, it's so easy to just do nothing.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, you know, you got to make a living, you got to eat. I mean, the bills are just piling up. You know,
Yeah.
it's scary. But I am fortunate. Kenny Banks and I have a couple things, you know, every week or so that we get to do, make a little cake.
Sure. Yeah, and you guys are so great together. It's one of my favorite acts of all time is you guys playing together. It's awesome. I want to ask you about that collaboration. I want to ask you about your band as well, the kind of formation of it and how it's developed over, I guess it's been about 10 years or more than 10 years since you guys formed.
Yeah, you know, my first experience with having my own big band was my Christmas record that I did, and I think it was 2006. My first, basically, a record company asked us to do a big band record, and so I put a band together. We did the record, and then we would get little spot gigs here and there. But it wasn't until about 11 years ago or 12 years ago where I started that kind of residency at Cafe 290 here in Atlanta, which was twice a month, every first and third Monday. And that's when things started to pick up for the band, and we started dedicating a lot of time to Wes Bundaberg writing charts for us, and eventually Mike Walton and Marla Feeney and Eric Alexander, the great trombone player here in town. A lot of charts were written for us via those folks, and I, maybe a year or two into it, knew that this was going to be big in this town. I mean, as far as the jazz scene is concerned, I mean, we were getting 180 people every Monday we played there. I mean, you couldn't move in the place for years.
Yeah.
WCLK was streaming it live for a while. So it was an experience for me that was exciting but difficult. I certainly had to change the way I played a little bit. I had to change the way I sing, because I always sang real quiet. I tried to, you know, I kind of try to emulate Chet Baker for a long time, which was a good way to slide into singing, because you can get away with a lot of stuff when you're almost whispering, right?
Yeah, sure.
But now I'm in front of a big band and I'm singing kind of Sinatra-ish arrangements or American Songbook things with horns behind me, and I had to learn how to sing different. And I would sing along with Dean Martin and Nat King Cole records and try to fill my voice out a little bit. And it took a while. I lost my voice so much during those first few years, and just somehow made it through the gigs. The trumpet playing changed quite a bit. I had to brighten my sound up a little bit, maybe to get over top of the big band. My band has always had the most ridiculous brass section, you know.
Yeah, they do.
Changes here and there with different personnel, but it's always the top guys, and they can play with the most amazing dynamics. But when they want to roar, and I'm playing trumpet on top of them, man, I gotta hug that mic, you know. So
oh, totally.
There was a lot involved with getting that thing going, but I'm so glad I did it, and I hope we can get back to working again.
Oh, I'm sure you will. I'm sure. And one time I talked to Jeff Hayden about that a little bit, about the development, he was talking about how you just work so hard on your vocal stuff to develop that, to make it as strong as it is now in that process. So you really, I mean, it took years, I'm sure, to really develop it to the point that it's at now.
It took a long time, and it wasn't until recently that I think people would even say I was a singer. You know, I'm certainly not a singer like a Carmen Bradford, you know, or Audrey Shakir, any of those folks. But I can carry a tune, and I can sing fairly in tune, and I feel like I have a nice way of phrasing these melodies. But to your point, there's a record called Frank Sinatra in the Wee Small Hours of the Morning, where he's singing all ballads with an orchestra, a small orchestra. And his phrases were so drawn out and so long. And I have a vinyl record player, and I would put that record on side A, and I would sing the whole side A with him. And I would try to hold my notes as long as he held them, which was very difficult. And I'm a brass player, so you think my lungs would be, but there's no resistance when you're singing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would just run out of air. And then I would try to color the end of the note with the vibrato like he would. Some people vibrato on the entire note, like Tony Bennett. Or Harry Connick Jr. does that too, and it's just beautiful. But I kind of liked how Frank would hold the note straight and then at the end kind of color it. So I tried that, and then I would take a break, play some trumpet, and then turn it over and do side B. And I did that for 2 years, barely missing a day, you know.
Wow.
And It really helped my voice. It really opened up my voice. And then I took a few lessons from Catherine Dunn, wonderful, more of an operatic vocal coach. And she was able to kind of get me more here than here. I was singing on my throat. Once again, another example. I took it upon myself to be great, and I never got there. I ended up doing shit wrong. Excuse my French. I ended up singing right here on my throat, which you're not supposed to do. And of course, I didn't know that. I would just sing all day and then go play a gig and sing and then have a scotch or two and then sing again. I'm losing my voice. Why am I losing my voice? I'm doing it now. I'm talking right on my throat. So she got me to kind of come up here and pay attention to getting off my throat. Peggy Still, if you know Peggy Still, another wonderful musician in town, producer, vocalist, piano player, educator. She does it all. She sat me down one day too because she noticed I was struggling on a gig, and she said, "I know what you're doing wrong." Yeah. She cleared me up. So that's why I have such a newfound love for music education. And not that I didn't. My wife's a great teacher at the Love teacher, but you can do things wrong. You know, exactly. Right. You need a coach to.
And a great coach can see those things that are just really these one stumbling block that's kind of holding you back. You know, some people may just gloss over it, but a great teacher is going to be just hone in on those little things that are going to make the next step possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really cool. So just in terms of your biography, I just want to jump back a little bit. Like you played with Tommy Dorsey band and the Glenn Miller band. Like this is in your 20s, and then you moved to New York City in your 20s too. Is that right?
When I went to college at Fredonia State College, which is outside of Buffalo, New York, south of Buffalo. Wonderful place right on Lake Erie. And I did 2 years there. And after my second year, halfway through my second year, my good friend and teacher, great friend now, Jeff Jarvis, I think Jeff had gotten a call to play with the Dorsey band and go on the road. And Jeff was the owner of Kendor Publishing Company, and he had a big career, and he wasn't about to leave that to go on the road. So he suggested me, one of his students. And then a guy named Dennis Tribuzzi, who's a world-class lead trumpet player in Buffalo, also kind of went to bat for me. So I went out with Dorsey. I quit college and I went out with Dorsey and did a year with them. Did pretty well. You know, it took me a while I almost got fired at one point because I was messing around too much. But I did a year with that band. And when I was out there, my mom and dad moved here.
Gotcha.
From Buffalo. So when I quit the Dorsey band, I had to make a decision. And I decided to finish college at Georgia State with Dr. Vernick, Gordon Vernick, and Dr. Hayden, Jeff Hayden. And when college ended 2 years later, I bolted to Manhattan, and I lived there as a 23-year-old man. It was just the greatest time of my life.
Oh, sure. Sure. And you had it.
Street in Central Park West.
Which was it again? I missed that. What was the number?
94th Street in Central Park West.
Oh, that's a great place. Yeah, it's a great place.
Across the street from Lou Tabakin.
Oh, wow. Really?
Toshiko. Yeah, I think they were still together.
Wow.
But yeah, he would practice and I would hear him, and I would practice open. He'd say, "Hey, come sit with the band."
You could hear him probably around the block. His sound is he's such a huge sound. That's really cool. So you're there, and you had a band in New York with was it Joe Cohn and who else?
Joe Cohn and Matt Hughes. That was a little later. My first kind of stint in New York was up on 94th Street, and Brian Lopes and I were roommates. Brian's a great Atlanta tenor player, played with the Roots Orchestra, and we moved up there together, and we would walk down to Smalls almost every night, which was 6 miles or something.
It's far, yeah.
Forever. And one night I was in there, and Joe Magnarelli was playing. It was his gig, and it was probably my second week in New York. And I remember hearing him play and just going, "Oh my God, that's what I want to sound like. That's how I want to play." You know, he had so much Kenny Dorham in his sound, and Fats Navarro and all the greats, but something stuck out of all the other trumpet players in New York. Something about Joe really hit me. And then I went that weekend. I got a club date. My first gig in New York was a wedding gig, and in New York, your wedding gigs can be continuous. They can be 5 hours long, you know, and you usually drive out to New Jersey or you go to Connecticut to play these wedding gigs, or Long Island. And the first hour is cocktail hour, so you're playing jazz, right? And then it goes into all that other stuff that we hope we don't have to do for the rest of our lives, right?
Yeah, right.
But I'll never forget the band leader called Blue Bassa. Now remember, I had just graduated Georgia State, and I had been on the road with Tommy Dorsey. I was a professional trumpet player. I thought I was pretty good, right? and he called Blue Bossa, and I knew the song. But what is it normally in G minor?
Yeah, right. No, it's usually in C minor.
It's usually in C minor, and he called it in like A minor or something.
Yeah.
I had no idea what that meant. I mean,
Really?
I couldn't do it. I couldn't. I was trying to do math in my head, like where does the melody start?
Yeah.
I was so disgusted with myself because if we did in C minor, boy, I could burn. I could play my 7 licks that I learned. Right? And I went home that night after that gig and walked down to Smalls and listened to Joe play again. And I'll never forget saying to Joe after the gig, Joe kind of took a liking to me. We became friends. And I said, Joe, why can't I play like you? You know, I have every Charlie Parker Omni book and every transcription book in the world. You know, I've learned every Freddie Hubbard solo. I can play them all. And he said, go home tonight and throw every book out. I said, what are you, crazy? He said, no, throw every book out. And he said, close your eyes and put on a damn record and learn to play what they're playing. You know, now I had done that with the Chet record, but the Chet record wasn't really so much about language. It was more about just playing pretty little phrases, right? Not that Chet Baker didn't have an immense amount of jazz language, but that particular record is mostly ballads, and he's playing pretty things here and there that I fell in love with. But what Joe was trying to get me to do was learn the language of jazz, which I really didn't know other than a couple. And I went home and I did what he said. I trusted him, and I threw everything away. I remember Brian Lopes was like, "What are you doing, man?" Said, I'm throwing it all out, and I put on what's the Blakey record with 3 Blind Mice and all those.
Oh yeah, is it Free for All or is it a different one? Or
I'm skipping now,
but with Freddie and with Wayne and
yeah, and I put that on, and I think Freddie played Blue Moon on that one, the ballad, and I remember that cadenza at the end, and I always liked it, and I said I'm going to figure out how to play this, and I transcribed it, and it took me a week, you know, which you know. It should take me an hour, you know, it should take me 2 hours, you know, it's not that long, but I did it by ear. And then I did another one by ear and then another one. And I started developing an ear and getting better. And it was so exciting. And I would tell Joe and he would kind of laugh, you know, and be like, yeah, man. But basically I started to learn how to speak the language, which was something that I skipped right over again in my quest to not necessarily shortcuts, but to get there quick, right?
Sure.
How important was that lesson from Mags, as we call him, right? It was one of the greatest lessons I ever learned.
Absolutely, and it's similar. I mean, all the people I've been talking to too, these great improvisers like yourself, they had that epiphany where it's all about your ear, you know. You just, or you know, once they trust that process, they seem to have success. And I guess, I mean, what really is striking about your playing to me is like your sound is so beautiful. So I guess you develop that in your early days and your love of lyricism and stuff like that, and also playing with a strong band like that, but then also developing that language, which I guess, you know, really results in a distinctive sound.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what it's all about. I mean, you know, when you think about it, when you're an infant, your parents don't get a book out and show you how to say yes and no and mama and dada. They just say it around the house. Eventually you hear it, and if they're from the South, you hear the dialect and you actually sound like them. If they're from the North, you hear the dialect. If you're you know, from a different country here, so you learn by ear, and if you learn this music by ear, then you can communicate through this music. If you learn it through a book, it goes in your eyes, but it never really goes into your heart and soul. You know,
yeah, totally.
Sometimes that can be the danger if you don't approach it the right way. You know, there's nothing wrong with, you got to be able to read, right? Sure. But there's nothing wrong with that. But you really, really need to open your ears up and do that. So all my students have to transcribe constantly. Yeah, I still do it. I've been doing a lot of it lately.
Do you write it out now when you transcribe, or do you just do it by ear and just move on?
I used to write it out. I transcribed that whole Blue Mitchell Blues Moods record.
That's a great one. Yeah.
And I bought a manuscript paper. I'm going way back now.
Yeah.
I wrote the whole thing out as neatly as I could with dynamics and little dots if it was a short note or whatever. And now I wouldn't unless it was a real long solo and I couldn't recall the whole thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with writing it down. I think that's fine. I mean, you know, somebody asked me the other day about singing and how do you remember all the lyrics? And, you know, Sinatra would write the lyrics down. He wouldn't necessarily read them off the manuscript unless he was in a session. You want to make sure you got every word right. But if he was flying from one city to the next and he was going to sing a song that he wasn't that familiar with, he would write it down over and over again, the lyrics. I think
Interesting.
there's something very positive to that, but it's all about your ear.
Yeah. Are you a believer in learning the lyrics to a song if you're going to play it, especially like a ballad or something like that on trumpet? Would you make sure? I know a lot of people say that's very essential to know the
Yeah,
lyrics.
I became that way after I started singing. Before I started singing, I didn't think, that was that important. My mother was always like, you should sing, you should sing. You said, come on, I don't want to sing. I want to play, man. I want to groove. I want to play with some fire. And then I sang one time because they were going to fire us if we didn't hire a singer. And they didn't want to give us any more money. So I just said, I'll sing. And boy, did the crowd dig it, I mean, not me, not my voice, but hearing the lyrics to these songs.
Sure.
And so did I. One of the first songs I learned was I'm Old Fashioned.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Johnny Mercer. And I was like, wow, these words are great. I mean, I played the song a bunch, but had no idea what it was about. So
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say I do it for every song. Like the other day, I had a little recording session on a Herbie Hancock song, Butterfly. I think it was called Butterfly. And there's lyrics, and I didn't sit down and learn the lyrics. I should have, but.
Gotcha. Because that's something that struck me about your playing too, is just the lyricism of your trumpet playing too, just like your ability to tell a story and just have a clear, concise like musical ideas rather than just playing a bunch of stuff. It's really impressive. I want to ask you about, in addition to being a great musician, I've never met anyone, I don't think, who's as good at the business end of music as you. How do you approach that? How do you I guess if you had to recommend a path, or how do you, I guess just your personality, just developing that kind of interpersonal skills that kind of develop your career?
The business side of it, once again, came by accident. It was one of those things where I, once again, didn't talk to anybody. I just started doing it. I started early on with my trio was Neil Starkey. And I graduated from Georgia State. I moved to New York City. I ran out of money a year and a half later. I came back to live with mom and dad, and now I'm in Atlanta. So I got the best players that I could, Bill Anshell on piano and Neil Starkey on bass. And I just went into a little restaurant that my girlfriend, who's now my wife, was working at. And she had heard the manager say, we should get some jazz in here. And she said, well, my boyfriend plays trumpet. So I went in there and I asked the guy if we could play 1 or 2 nights a week for like $50 and some spaghetti, Mm-hmm. And he said, yeah, sure. So I got those guys because I wanted the best musicians, and they did the gig with me, and we did Sundays and Wednesdays for a long time. But what started happening was people enjoyed the music. We played real quiet. They could talk. They could listen to each other speak. And I was at an early age, like way back then, I could see that it's important for them to be able to converse with each other. And we don't want to be playing so loud that they can't. So I learned that lesson. And then they started asking us, guests would come up and say, hey, you'd be great for our Christmas party, or you'd be great for our daughter's cocktail hour before her wedding, So we started playing gigs like that. And I put a little contract together. And that's kind of how the business side started. And before I knew it, I had 7 nights a week steady gigs. I actually had 8 gigs a week at one point. I had every night, and then I had a Sunday brunch. And Neil Starkey did every single one of them with me. And so did Bill Anshell, and then Bill moved to Seattle. But and Randy Honey took over on guitar, the great Randy Honey. But I mean, that's way back in the day. But that's kind of how the business thing. Now I had a band, a small band, but I had a band. I had to make sure these guys always knew the details, and I had to make sure that I always got the check. I had to have a bank account. I had to balance the checkbook. That was a lot of money coming in for a 23 or 4-year-old, and a lot of money going out, and taxes. Now, how do I deal with that?
Yeah.
So, now you got to send 1099. So I learned it all on my own, and I'm kind of still learning. And sometimes I have to write huge contracts for my big band. We played at the Beau Rivage Casino every New Year's Eve for 4 or 5 years, and that was just a huge contract with all kinds of stipulations, and I just kind of plow through it. And if I have questions to ask, I'll ask a lawyer friend or something like that. Now the other side of it, being a people person, I'm very shy, and I'm very antisocial. Like I don't like to go. I mean, I like to go out, but I really like being alone, being with my wife, being with my son, just watching a movie or something like that. But when I am out, I can turn it on, And
that's impressive.
I got that from my father for sure.
Yeah, no, I've seen him. I don't know if we've ever spoken before, but he looks like a guy who's he's very suave and people person too.
Yeah,
You mentioned just the business end of it, networking with people, and that's when I first saw your big band play at 290, I think it was, and it was just the amount of audience enthusiasm was shocking to me, because being in the jazz world, there's a lot of you have gigs and you play, and they're great players and stuff like that, but they're not necessarily engaging with the audience or giving them exactly what they want. And I thought that was impressive that you do that, and I don't think I've seen people so enthusiastic. They really love it, so I guess you just kind of follow, and you balance it, which I'm impressed by too. Like, you balance it, you're not just pandering to the audience, like you give them stuff they love and you challenge them with something else. So how do you approach that? Do you feel like there's a certain amount?
That's trial and error for sure.
Yeah,
I noticed that early on. I noticed when the big band started performing, I noticed the enthusiasm from the crowd and the different people that would come out, the people that weren't necessarily the diehard jazz fans, right? A lot of these people might not even know that much about jazz, but they heard that there was this big band doing Sinatra type stuff and Dean Martin type stuff. So they would come out. Now instead of 20 people in the club, now we're having 200 people in the club, and they would just go crazy. And I could tell if we did Giant Steps and then Cherokee and then another instrumental, if we did 2 or 3 in a row, I could tell I was losing them. I could see it. Now there's the diehard people that would love that. But I could see people start checking their phones, people start getting up, go to the bar, people start chatting with each other. And I'm standing right there, and you've been to Cafe Tonight, you've played in the band a lot.
Yeah.
The tables are right there in front of me. So, I mean, I could see what they're texting,
Yeah.
So I learned early on that I was losing them. So then we would do a couple Sinatra things, and they'd be right back in it. But then I could see the other people, we're losing the other. They want to hear these guys play a little bit too, So you slowly have to figure out your audience. And like you said, you don't really pander to them, but you certainly understand the fact that they paid money to come see you and they want to be entertained. And I figure I'm an entertainer now. I'm not Miles Davis, as much as I wish I was. I'm never going to be that guy that can turn his back to the audience and can be so involved in the music on stage that I don't really have to acknowledge the audience. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing that Miles did, but his way of doing things worked for him.
Yeah.
And I think as a trumpet player, we all wanted to be like a Miles type character, cool and handsome and wear the right clothes and play just the perfect notes every time. And if I want to throw out a vibe, I can throw out a vibe. I'm just not that guy, and nowhere near that kind of trumpet player. So I figured, what if I kind of focus more on being an entertainer? I can make people laugh a little bit. I can sing some songs they recognize. I can still play. I mean, I'm a decent player, and my band is filled with amazing players. So I tried to balance it that way, and fortunately, it really worked. I mean, we don't get on a tour bus and travel around the country and perform all over. I wish we were, but we certainly play plenty of performing arts centers and sometimes to 1,000 people, a couple thousand people, and it's a thrill. And we can put together a show that there's something there for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're underselling your trumpet playing. Your trumpet playing is unbelievable, and the band is so great. And I was always just so impressed by that. Like, even if it was, I was just the audience was just out of their seats almost. They're so excited to hear the music, and I was always impressed by that.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. So you're wearing your hat of your album, which is a great album, by the way. Go Get It. I love that. What's next for you? Are you recording anything? Are you kind of planning something when the world goes back to normal?
I don't know. My normal vibe is to be a step ahead of what I think is next, and have something in the works. And I'm not sure yet. I do a little bit of acting. I have a great agent, the People Store for my acting, and I did do one scene in the new Jennifer Hudson movie called Respect by Aretha Franklin, right before kind of the COVID thing hit. So that was really exciting because I had one line, but I had a little speaking part. So I might focus a little bit more on that as things kind of come back around, and I don't want things to change much from where they were before. I want to keep working locally and keep working in the Southeast. I'm hoping and praying that Cafe 290 can keep it together and stay open.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's our home. That's our home. But as far as like some big plan, the only thing that I want to do fairly soon is another duo recording with Kenny Banks. We've been talking about it, and that's a little bit of an easier undertaking than another big band record with 15 new arrangements and rehearsals and all that, and the amount of money it costs with no record label except an independent label, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So Kenny and I will put something together fairly soon.
Cool.
And,
Cool.
And then just hope we all get out of this safely and
I know.
get back on it.
I know. You guys playing? You guys had a couple duo gigs recently. Are you have anything coming up in the next?
Yeah,
month?
Kenny and I are at Ray's on the river every Saturday night.
Cool.
At least through July, and then we'll see what happens after that. But I have a lot of gigs on the books for August, and they're slowly getting pushed months and months back. How about yourself?
Yeah, some things are kind of picking up. A couple like weird wedding things.
Mm-hmm.
Just people who are not, or just they're going ahead with their weddings and little cocktail parties, kind of pared down events. I played at the Ritz downtown a couple times last week. They're taking baby steps back into booking, because I played there for a couple years.
Yeah.
So they're kind of just trying to see if they can get some music back.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So
What's it like in there? Are guests coming out?
It was pretty quiet. I think they had a lot of people. They had more people booked than they expected, so they called and said, "Let's just try it." But there weren't people hanging at the bar that much. That was the thing. People were probably upstairs in their room or whatever. Their booking was up, but it wasn't in the bar. So it was, it was decent. People lingered and were happy to hear music. They had commented on that, just the fact it was a novelty, just hearing live music again.
Yeah, I got that at Kenny and I got that at Ray's too. Most of the time we're outside by the river, unless it's raining. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people out there eating dinner, and they're thankful that there's live music again.
I know we take it for granted, beforehand. So yeah, it's just slow. We'll see what happens, but I'm definitely looking forward to to hearing you next time and hearing the band. I can't wait to hear the band again.
We'll fire it up. We'll do something. We did a live stream concert fundraiser for 290 back in May.
Cool.
The Big Green Egg, man. They kind of sponsored it for us and filmed it, and it was really, really fun. And we raised a lot of 290 to kind of get through the months where they couldn't open. We might do another live stream thing, but even that now you have to be careful, because it's you're still there together. I mean, you could socially distance, but you're interacting all the time, and
sure,
how much is this virus is it in the air? Who really knows? I think once they get a vaccine, then we can feel a little more comfortable and hopefully start gigging again. But you probably heard the Vista Room closed.
I heard about the Vista Room, and I'm sure that's not the we'll hear about other ones, unfortunately. I don't know how, unless you have a ton of cash on hand, I don't know how you survive no business for an unknown amount of time.
That's the issue that these guys are having and gals. It's like, do we dig into our savings to keep this thing afloat? If they knew in 3 months, boom, we're back to normal, then they could decide if they have enough money to float it that long. But how long do they have to float it? Another year?
I know, just the unknown.
They don't know. And how sad is it to have to dig into your retirement and your life savings, especially if you have a family?
Sure.
If you have no guarantee that money's not just going down the tubes, and you're gonna have
I know.
So it's a very, very scary thing.
I know. And then at what point do you bring back music? It's one thing to keep the thing on life support, but then adding on music, that's a whole. So a lot of my music, a lot of our friends or a lot of colleagues are so unknown.
Yeah.
As a freelancer, I'm lucky. With my teaching job, I still have income from that, so that keeps me not having to constantly hustle. But there's not anything to hustle out there anyway. So yeah, it's definitely difficult. Yeah. But man, I can't thank you enough. I've taken your time. I know you're really busy, and it's an honor to talk to you. So thanks.
Good, man. Go ahead. I appreciate it, man. I'm glad to be with you. I think this is like a really cool thing you're doing.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 2 of the Atlanta Jazz Notes podcast. Please be sure to check out the website at atlantajazznotes.com and videos of all the podcasts on our YouTube channel. If you like what you heard, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.